Disease burden is the impact of a health problem in an area measured by financial cost, mortality, morbidity, or other indicators. There are several measures used to quantify the burden imposed by diseases on people. The years of potential life lost (YPLL) is a simple estimate of the number of years that a person's life was shortened due to a disease. For example, if a person dies at the age of 65 from a disease, and would probably have lived until age 80 without that disease, then that disease has caused a loss of 15 years of potential life. YPLL measurements do not account for how disabled a person is before dying, so the measurement treats a person who dies suddenly and a person who died at the same age after decades of illness as equivalent. In 2004, the World Health Organization calculated that 932 million years of potential life were lost to premature death. 41. The quality-adjusted life year (QALY) and disability-adjusted life year (DALY) metrics are similar but take into account whether the person was healthy after diagnosis. In addition to the number of years lost due to premature death, these measurements add part of the years lost to being sick. Unlike YPLL, these measurements show the burden imposed on people who are very sick, but who live a normal lifespan. A disease that has high morbidity, but low mortality, has a high DALY and a low YPLL. In 2004, the World Health Organization calculated that 1.5 billion disability-adjusted life years were lost to disease and injury. 41. In the developed world, heart disease and stroke cause the most loss of life, but neuropsychiatric conditions like major depressive disorder cause the most years lost to being sick. Society and culture. Obesity was a status symbol in Renaissance culture. The Tuscan general Alessandro del Barro, attributed to Andrea Sacchi, 1645. 42. It is now generally regarded as a disease. How a society responds to diseases is the subject of medical sociology. A condition may be considered a disease in some cultures or eras but not in others. For example, obesity was associated with prosperity and abundance, and this perception persists in many African regions, especially since the beginning of the HIV/AIDS. 43. Epilepsy is considered a sign of spiritual gifts among the Hmong people. 44. Sickness confers the social legitimization of certain benefits, such as illness benefits, work avoidance, and being looked after by others. The person who is sick takes on a social role called the sick role. A person who responds to a dreaded disease, such as cancer, in a culturally acceptable fashion may be publicly and privately honored with higher social status. 45. In return for these benefits, the sick person is obligated to seek treatment and work to become well once more. As a comparison, consider pregnancy, which is not interpreted as a disease or sickness, even if the mother and baby may both benefit from medical care. Most religions grant exceptions from religious duties to people who are sick. For example, one whose life would be endangered by fasting on Yom Kippur or during the month of Ramadan is exempted from the requirement, or even forbidden from participating. 46. 47. People who are sick are also exempted from social duties. For example, ill health is the only socially acceptable reason for an American to refuse an invitation to the White House. 48. The identification of a condition as a disease, rather than as simply a variation of human structure or function, can have significant social or economic implications. The controversial recognition of diseases such as repetitive stress injury (RSI) and post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD) has had a number of positive and negative effects on the financial and other responsibilities of governments, corporations, and institutions towards individuals, as well as on the individuals themselves. The social implication of viewing aging as a disease could be profound, though this classification is not yet widespread. Lepers were people who were historically shunned because they had an infectious disease, and the term leper still evokes social stigma. Fear of disease can still be a widespread social phenomenon, though not all diseases evoke extreme social stigma. Social standing and economic status affect health. Diseases of poverty are diseases that are associated with poverty and low social status. Diseases of affluence are diseases that are associated with high social and economic status. Which diseases are associated with which states vary according to time, place, and technology. Some diseases, such as diabetes mellitus, may be associated with both poverty, poor food choices, and affluence, long lifespans and sedentary lifestyles through different mechanisms. The term lifestyle diseases describes diseases associated with longevity and that are more common among older people. For example, cancer is far more common in societies in which most members live until they reach the age of 80 than in societies in which most members die before they reach the age of 50. Language of disease. An illness narrative is a way of organizing a medical experience into a coherent story that illustrates the sick individual's personal experience. People use metaphors to make sense of their experiences with disease. The metaphors move disease from an objective thing that exists to an affective experience. The most popular metaphors draw on military concepts. Disease is an enemy that must be feared, fought, battled, and routed. The patient or the healthcare provider is a warrior, rather than a passive victim or bystander. The agents of communicable diseases are invaders. Non-communicable diseases constitute internal insurrection or civil war. Because the threat is urgent, perhaps a matter of life and death, unthinkably radical, even oppressive, measures are societies and the patient's moral duty as they courageously mobilize to struggle against destruction. The war on cancer is an example of this metaphorical use. Medicine portal. Biology portal. Of language. 49. This language is empowering to some patients, but leaves others feeling like they are failures. 50. Another class of metaphors describes the experience of illness as a journey. The person travels to or from a place of disease, and changes himself, discovers new information, or increases his experience along the way. He may travel, on the road to recovery, or make changes to get on the right track, or choose pathways. 49. 50. Some are explicitly immigration themed. The patient has been exiled from the home territory of health to the land of the ill, changing identity and relationships in the process. 51. This language is more common among British healthcare professionals than the language of physical aggression. 50. Some metaphors are disease-specific. Slavery is a common metaphor for addictions. The alcoholic is enslaved by drink, and the smoker is captive to nicotine. Some cancer patients treat the loss of their hair from chemotherapy as a metonymy or metaphor for all the losses caused by the disease. 49. Some diseases are used as metaphors for social ills. Cancer is a common description for anything that is endemic and destructive in society, such as poverty, injustice, or racism. AIDS was seen as a divine judgment for moral decadence, and only by purging itself from the pollution of the invader could society become healthy again. 49. More recently, when AIDS seemed less threatening, this type of emotive language was applied to avian flu and type 2 diabetes mellitus. 52. Authors in the 19th century commonly used tuberculosis as a symbol and a metaphor for transcendence. People with the disease were portrayed in literature as having risen above daily life to become ephemeral objects of spiritual or artistic achievement. In the 20th century, after its cause was better understood, the same disease became the emblem of poverty, squalor, and other social problems. 51. Cryptogenic disease, a disease whose cause is currently unknown. Developmental disability, severe, lifelong disabilities attributable to mental or physical impairments. Environmental disease. Host-pathogen interaction. Epidemiology. Epidemiology is the study and analysis of the distribution, who, when, and where patterns and determinants of health and disease conditions in a defined population. It is a cornerstone of public health, and shapes policy decisions and evidence-based practice by identifying risk factors for disease and targets for preventive healthcare. Epidemiologists help with study design, collection, and statistical analysis of data, amend interpretation and dissemination of results, including peer review and occasional systematic review. Epidemiology has helped develop methodology used in clinical research, public health studies, and, to a lesser extent, basic research in the biological sciences. 1. Major areas of epidemiological study include disease causation, transmission, outbreak investigation, disease surveillance, environmental epidemiology, forensic epidemiology, occupational epidemiology, screening, biomonitoring, and comparisons of treatment effects such as in clinical trials. Epidemiologists rely on other scientific disciplines like biology to better understand disease processes, statistics to make efficient use of the data and draw appropriate conclusions, social sciences to better understand proximate and distal causes, and engineering for exposure assessment. Epidemiology, literally meaning, the study of what is upon the people, is derived from Greek epi upon, among, demos people, district, and logos study, word, discourse, suggesting that it applies only to human populations. However, the term is widely used in studies of zoological populations, veterinary epidemiology, although the term, epizoology, is available, and it has also been applied to studies of plant populations, botanical or plant disease epidemiology. 2. The distinction between epidemic and endemic was first drawn by Hippocrates. 3. To distinguish between diseases that are visited upon a population epidemic from those that reside within a population endemic. 4. The term epidemiology appears to have first been used to describe the study of epidemics in 1802 by the Spanish physician Joaquín de Villalba in Epidemiologia Española. 4. Epidemiologists also study the interaction of diseases in a population, a condition known as a syndemic. The term epidemiology is now widely applied to cover the description and causation of not only epidemic, infectious disease, but of disease in general, including related conditions. Some examples of topics examined through epidemiology include as high blood pressure, mental illness and obesity. Therefore, this epidemiology is based upon how the pattern of the disease causes change in the function of human beings. The Greek physician Hippocrates, taught by Democritus, was known as the father of medicine. 5/6 Cytologic to sickness. He is the first person known to have examined the relationships between the occurrence of disease and environmental influences. 7. Hippocrates believed sickness of the human body to be caused by an imbalance of the four humors: black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. The cure to the sickness was to remove or add the humor in question to balance the body. This belief led to the application of bloodletting and dieting in medicine. 8. He coined the terms endemic for diseases usually found in some places but not in others, and epidemic for diseases that are seen at some times but not others. 9. Modern era. In the middle of the 16th century, a doctor from Verona named Girolamo Fracastoro was the first to propose a theory that the very small, unseeable particles that cause disease were alive. They were considered to be able to spread by air, multiply by themselves and to be destroyable by fire. In this way he refuted Galen's miasma theory, poison gas in sick people. In 1543 he wrote a book De Contagione et Contagiosis Morbis, in which he was the first to promote personal and environmental hygiene to prevent disease. The development of a sufficiently powerful microscope by Antony van Leeuwenhoek in 1675 provided visual evidence of living particles consistent with a germ theory of disease. During the Ming Dynasty, Wu Yuge (1582–1652) developed the idea that some diseases were caused by transmissible agents, which he called liqi or pestilential factors, when he observed various epidemics rage around him between 1641 and 1644. 10. His book Wenyi Lun, Wenyi Lun, Treatise on Pestilence, Treatise of Epidemic Diseases, can be regarded as the main etiological work that brought forward the concept. 11. His concepts were still being considered in analyzing SARS outbreak by WHO in 2004 in the context of traditional Chinese medicine. 12. Another pioneer, Thomas Sydenham (1624–1689), was the first to distinguish the fevers of Londoners in the later 1600s. His theories on cures of fevers met with much resistance from traditional physicians at the time. He was not able to find the initial cause of the smallpox fever he researched and treated. 8. History. John Graunt, a haberdasher and amateur statistician, published natural and political observations upon the bills of mortality in 1662. In it, he analyzed the mortality rolls in London before the Great Plague, presented one of the first life tables, and reported time trends for many diseases, new and old. He provided statistical evidence for many theories on disease, and also refuted some widespread ideas on them. Original map by John Snow showing the clusters of cholera cases in the London epidemic of 1854. John Snow is famous for his investigations into the causes of the 19th century cholera epidemics, and is also known as the father of modern epidemiology. 1314 He began with noticing the significantly higher death rates in two areas supplied by Southwark Company. His identification of the Broad Street pump as the cause of the Soho epidemic is considered the classic example of epidemiology. Snow used chlorine in an attempt to clean the water and remove the handle. This ended the outbreak. This has been perceived as a major event in the history of public health and regarded as the founding event of the science of epidemiology, having helped shape public health policies around the world. 1516 However, Snow's research and preventive measures to avoid further outbreaks were not fully accepted or put into practice until after his death due to the prevailing miasma theory of the time, a model of disease in which poor air quality was blamed for illness. This was used to rationalize high rates of infection in impoverished areas instead of addressing the underlying issues of poor nutrition and sanitation, and was proven false by his work. 17 Other pioneers include Danish physician Peter Anton Schleissner, who in 1849 related his work on the prevention of the epidemic of neonatal tetanus on the Vestmanna Islands in Iceland. 1819 Another important pioneer was Hungarian physician Ignaz Semmelweis, who in 1847 brought down infant mortality at a Vienna hospital by instituting a disinfection procedure. His findings were published in 1850, but his work was ill received by his colleagues, who discontinued the procedure. Disinfection did not become widely practiced until British surgeon Joseph Lister discovered antiseptics in 1865 in light of the work of Louis Pasteur. In the early 20th century, mathematical methods were introduced into epidemiology by Ronald Ross, Janet Lane Clapon, Anderson Gray McKendrick, and others. 20, 21, 22, 23 In a parallel development during the 1920s, German-Swiss pathologist Max Askenazy and others founded the International Society for Geographical Pathology to systematically investigate the geographical pathology of cancer and other non-infectious diseases across populations in different regions. After World War II, Richard Dahl and other non-pathologists joined the field and advanced methods to study cancer, a disease with patterns and mode of occurrences that could not be suitably studied with the methods developed for epidemics of infectious diseases. Geography pathology eventually combined with infectious disease epidemiology to make the field that is epidemiology today. 24. Another breakthrough was the 1954 publication of the results of a British doctor's study, led by Richard Dahl and Austin Bradford Hill, which lent very strong statistical support to the link between tobacco smoking and lung cancer. In the late 20th century, with the advancement of biomedical sciences, a number of molecular markers in blood, other biospecimens and environment were identified as predictors of development or risk of a certain disease. Epidemiology research to examine the relationship between these biomarkers analyzed at the molecular level in disease was broadly named molecular epidemiology. Specifically, genetic epidemiology has been used for epidemiology of germline genetic variation in disease. Genetic variation is typically determined using DNA from peripheral blood leukocytes. 21st century. Since the 2000s, genome-wide association studies (GWAS) have been commonly performed to identify genetic risk factors for many diseases and health conditions. 25. While most molecular epidemiology studies are still using conventional disease diagnosis and classification systems, it is increasingly recognized that disease progression represents inherently heterogeneous processes differing from person to person. Conceptually, each individual has a unique disease process different from any other individual. The unique disease principle, 26-27 considering uniqueness of the exposome, a totality of endogenous and exogenous environmental exposures, and its unique influence on molecular pathologic process in each individual. Studies to examine the relationship between an exposure and molecular pathologic signature of disease, particularly cancer, became increasingly common throughout the 2000s. However, the use of molecular pathology in epidemiology posed unique challenges, including lack of research guidelines and standardized statistical methodologies, and paucity of interdisciplinary experts and training programs. 28 Furthermore, the concept of disease heterogeneity appears to conflict with the long-standing premise in epidemiology that individuals with the same disease name have similar etiologies and disease processes. To resolve these issues in advanced population health science in the era of molecular precision medicine, molecular pathology, and epidemiology, was integrated to create a new interdisciplinary field of molecular pathological epidemiology, MPE 2930, defined as epidemiology of molecular pathology and heterogeneity of disease. In MPE, investigators analyze the relationships between A. Environmental, dietary, lifestyle and genetic factors, B. Alterations in cellular or extracellular molecules, and C. Evolution and progression of disease. A better understanding of heterogeneity of disease pathogenesis will further contribute to elucidate etiologies of disease. The MPE approach can be applied to not only neoplastic diseases but also non-neoplastic diseases. 31 The concept and paradigm of MPE have become widespread in the 2010s. 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38. By 2012, it was recognized that many pathogens' evolution is rapid enough to be highly relevant to epidemiology, and that therefore much could be gained from an interdisciplinary approach to infectious disease integrating epidemiology and molecular evolution to inform controlled strategies or even patient treatment. 39-40 Modern epidemiological studies can use advanced statistics and machine learning to create predictive models as well as to define treatment effects. 41-42 There is increasing recognition that a wide range of modern data sources, many not originating from healthcare or epidemiology, can be used for epidemiological study. Such digital epidemiology can include data from internet searching, mobile phone records and retail sales of drugs. Types of studies. Epidemiologic study hierarchy. Epidemiologists employ a range of study designs from the observational to experimental and generally categorized as descriptive, involving the assessment of data covering time, place, and person; analytic, aiming to further examine known associations or hypothesize relationships; and experimental, a term often equated with clinical or community trials of treatments and other interventions. In observational studies, nature is allowed to take its course, as epidemiologists observe from the sidelines. Conversely, in experimental studies, the epidemiologist is the one in control of all of the factors entering a certain case study. 43 Epidemiological studies are aimed, where possible, at revealing unbiased relationships between exposures such as alcohol or smoking, biological agents, stress, or chemicals to mortality or morbidity. The identification of causal relationships between these exposures and outcomes is an important aspect of epidemiology. Modern epidemiologists use informatics and infodemiology 44-45 as tools. 46-47-48 Observational studies have two components, descriptive and analytical. Descriptive observations pertain to the who, what, where and when of health-related state occurrence. However, analytical observations deal more with the how of a health-related event. 43 Experimental epidemiology contains three case types. Randomized controlled trials, often used for a new medicine or drug testing; field trials, conducted on those at a high risk of contracting a disease; and community trials, research on social originating diseases. 43 The term epidemiologic triad is used to describe the intersection of host, agent, and environment in analyzing an outbreak. 49 Case series. Case series may refer to the qualitative study of the experience of a single patient, or small group of patients with a similar diagnosis, or to a statistical factor with the potential to produce illness with periods when they are unexposed. 50 The former type of study is purely descriptive and cannot be used to make inferences about the general population of patients with that disease. These types of studies, in which an astute clinician identifies an unusual feature of a disease or a patient's history, may lead to a formulation of a new hypothesis. Using the data from the series, analytic studies could be done to investigate possible causal factors. These can include case control studies or prospective studies. A case control study would involve matching comparable controls without the disease to the cases in the series. A prospective study would involve following the case series over time to evaluate the disease's natural history. 51 The latter type, more formally described as self-controlled case series studies, divide individual patient follow-up time into exposed and unexposed periods and use fixed effects Poisson regression processes to compare the incidence rate of a given outcome between exposed and unexposed periods. The latter type, more formally described as self-controlled case series studies, divide individual patient follow-up time into exposed and unexposed periods and use fixed effects Poisson regression processes to compare the incidence rate of a given outcome between exposed and unexposed periods. This technique has been extensively used in the study of adverse reactions to vaccination and has been shown in some circumstances to provide statistical power comparable to that available in cohort studies. Case control studies. Case control studies select subjects based on their disease status. It is a retrospective study. A group of individuals that are disease positive, the case group, is compared with a group of disease negative individuals, the control group. The control group should ideally come from the same population that gave rise to the cases. The case control study looks back through time at potential exposures that both groups, cases and controls, may have encountered. A 2x2 table is constructed, displaying exposed cases A, exposed controls B, unexposed cases C, and unexposed controls D. The statistic generated to measure association is the odds ratio OR 52, which is the ratio of the odds of exposure in the cases A, C, to the odds of exposure in the controls B, D, i.e. OR equals AD, BC. Cases controls. Exposed AB, unexposed CD. If the OR is significantly greater than 1, then the conclusion is, those with the disease are more likely to have been exposed, whereas if it is close to 1 then the exposure and disease are not likely associated. If the OR is far less than 1, then this suggests that the exposure is a protective factor in the causation of the disease. Case control studies are usually faster and more cost-effective than cohort studies but are sensitive to bias, such as recall bias and selection bias. The main challenge is to identify the appropriate control group. The distribution of exposure among the control group should be representative of the distribution in the population that gave rise to the cases. This can be achieved by drawing a random sample from the original population at risk. This has as a consequence that the control group can contain people with the disease under study when the disease has a high attack rate in a population. A major drawback for case control studies is that, in order to be considered to be statistically significant, the minimum number of cases required at the 95% confidence interval is related to the odds ratio by the equation, where n is the ratio of cases to controls. As the odds ratio approaches 1, the number of cases required for statistical significance grows towards infinity, rendering case control studies all but useless for low odds ratios. Epidemiology has its limits at the point where an inference is made that the relationship between an agent and a disease is causal, general causation, and where the magnitude of excess risk attributed to the agent has been determined. That is, epidemiology addresses whether an agent can cause disease, not whether an agent did cause a specific plaintiff's disease. 58. In United States law, epidemiology alone cannot prove that a causal association does not exist in general. Conversely, it can be, and is in some circumstances taken by U.S. courts, in an individual case, to justify an inference that a causal association does exist, based upon a balance of probability. The subdiscipline of forensic epidemiology is directed at the investigation of specific causation of disease or injury in individuals or groups of individuals in instances in which causation is disputed or is unclear, for presentation in legal settings. Population-based health management. Epidemiological practice and the results of epidemiological analysis make a significant contribution to emerging population-based health management frameworks. Population-based health management encompasses the ability to assess the health states and health needs of a target population, implement and evaluate interventions that are designed to improve the health of that population, and efficiently and effectively provide care for members of that population in a way that is consistent with the community's cultural, policy and health resource values. Modern population-based health management is complex, requiring a multiple set of skills: medical, political, technological, mathematical, etc., of which epidemiological practice and analysis is a core component, that is unified with management science to provide efficient and effective health care and health guidance to a population. This task requires the forward-looking ability of modern risk management approaches that transform health risk factors, incidence, prevalence and mortality statistics derived from epidemiological analysis into management metrics that not only guide how a health system responds to current population health issues but also how a health system can be managed to better respond to future potential population health issues. 59. Examples of organizations that use population-based health management that leverage the work and results of epidemiological practice include Canadian Strategy for Cancer Control, Health Canada Tobacco Control Programs, Rick Hansen Foundation, Canadian Tobacco Control Research Initiative. 60, 61, 62. Each of these organizations uses a population-based health management framework called Life at Risk that combines epidemiological quantitative analysis with demographics, health agency operational research and economics to perform population life impact simulations, measurement of the future potential impact of disease upon the population with respect to new disease cases, prevalence, premature death as well as potential years of life lost from disability and death. Labor force life impact simulations, measurement of the future potential impact of disease upon the labor force with respect to new disease cases, prevalence, premature death and potential years of life lost from disability and death. Economic impacts of disease simulations, measurement of the future potential impact of disease upon private sector disposable income impacts, wages, corporate profits, private health care costs and public sector disposable income impacts, personal income tax, corporate income tax, consumption taxes, publicly funded health care costs. Applied field epidemiology. Applied epidemiology is the practice of using epidemiological methods to protect or improve the health of a population. Applied field epidemiology can include investigating communicable and non-communicable disease outbreaks, mortality and morbidity rates, and nutritional status, among other indicators of health, with the purpose of communicating the results to those who can implement appropriate policies or disease control measures. Humanitarian context. As the surveillance and reporting of diseases and other health factors become increasingly difficult in humanitarian crisis situations, the methodologies used to report the data are compromised. One study found that less than half, 42.4%, of nutrition surveys sampled from humanitarian contexts correctly calculated the prevalence of malnutrition and only 1/3, 35.3%, of the surveys met the criteria for quality. Among the mortality surveys, only 3.2% met the criteria for quality. As nutritional status and mortality rates help indicate the severity of a crisis, the tracking and reporting of these health factors is crucial. Vital registries are usually the most effective ways to collect data, but in humanitarian contexts these registries can be non-existent, unreliable, or inaccessible. As such, mortality is often inaccurately measured using either prospective demographic surveillance or retrospective mortality surveys. Prospective demographic surveillance requires much manpower and is difficult to implement in a spread-out population. Retrospective mortality surveys are prone to selection and reporting biases. Other methods are being developed, but are not common practice yet. 63, 64, 65, 66. Characterization, validity, and bias. Epidemic wave. The concept of waves in epidemics has implications especially for communicable diseases. A working definition for the term, epidemic wave, is based on two key features. 1. It comprises periods of upward or downward trends, and 2. These increases or decreases must be substantial and sustained over a period of time, in order to distinguish them from minor fluctuations or reporting errors. 67. The use of a consistent scientific definition is to provide a consistent language that can be used to communicate about and understand the progression of the COVID-19 pandemic, which would aid healthcare organizations and policymakers in resource planning and allocation. Validities. Different fields in epidemiology have different levels of validity. One way to assess the validity of findings is the ratio of false positives, claimed effects that are not correct, to false negatives, studies which fail to support a true effect. In genetic epidemiology, candidate gene studies may produce over 100 false positive findings for each false negative. By contrast, genome-wide association appear close to the reverse, with only one false positive for every 100 or more false negatives. 68. This ratio has improved over time in genetic epidemiology, as the field has adopted stringent criteria. By contrast, other epidemiological fields have not required such rigorous reporting and are much less reliable as a result. 68. Random error. Random error is the result of fluctuations around a true value because of sampling variability. Random error is just that, random. It can occur during data collection, coding, transfer, or analysis. Examples of random errors include poorly worded questions, a misunderstanding in interpreting an individual answer from a particular respondent, or a typographical error during coding. Random error affects measurement in a transient, inconsistent manner and it is impossible to correct for random error. There is a random error in all sampling procedures, sampling error. Precision in epidemiological variables is a measure of random error. Precision is also inversely related to random error, so that to reduce random error is to increase precision. Confidence intervals are computed to demonstrate the precision of relative risk estimates. The narrower the confidence interval, the more precise the relative risk estimate. There are two basic ways to reduce random error in an epidemiological study. The first is to increase the sample size of the study. In other words, add more subjects to your study. The second is to reduce the variability in measurement in the study. This might be accomplished by using a more precise measuring device or by increasing the number of measurements. Note that if sample size or number of measurements are increased, or a more precise measuring tool is purchased, the costs of the study are usually increased. There is usually an uneasy balance between the need for adequate precision and the practical issue of study cost. Systematic error. A systematic error or bias occurs when there is a difference between the true value in the population and the observed value in the study from any cause other than sampling variability. An example of systematic error is if, unknown to you, the pulse oximeter you are using is set incorrectly and adds 2 points to the true value each time a measurement is taken. The measuring device could be precise but not accurate. Because the error happens in every instance, it is systematic. Conclusions you draw based on that data will still be incorrect. But the error can be reproduced in the future, e.g., by using the same mis-set instrument. A mistake in coding that affects all responses for that particular question is another example of a systematic error. The validity of a study is dependent on the degree of systematic error. Validity is usually separated into two components. Internal validity is dependent on the amount of error in measurements, including exposure, disease, and the associations between these variables. Good internal validity implies a lack of error in measurement and suggests that inferences may be drawn at least as they pertain to the subjects under study. External validity pertains to the process of generalizing the findings of the study to the population from which a sample was drawn, or even beyond that population to a more universal statement. This requires an understanding of which conditions are relevant or irrelevant to the generalization. Internal validity is clearly a prerequisite for external validity. Selection bias. Selection bias occurs when study subjects are selected or become part of the study as a result of a third, unmeasured variable which is associated with both the exposure and outcome of interest. 69. For instance, it has repeatedly been noted that cigarette smokers and non-smokers tend to differ in their study participation rates. Sackett D. cites the example of Seltzer et al., in which 85% of non-smokers and 67% of smokers returned mailed questionnaires. 70. Such a difference in response will not lead to bias if it is not also associated with a systematic difference in outcome between the two response groups. Information bias. Information bias is bias arising from systematic error in the assessment of a variable. 71. An example of this is recall bias. A typical example is again provided by Sackett in his discussion of a study examining the effect of specific exposures on fetal health. In questioning mothers whose recent pregnancies had ended in fetal death or malformation cases, and a matched group of mothers whose pregnancies ended normally controls, it was found that 28% of the former, but only 20% of the latter, reported exposure to drugs which could not be substantiated either in earlier prospective interviews or in other health records. 70. In this example, recall bias probably occurred as a result of women who had had miscarriages having an apparent tendency to better recall and therefore report previous exposures. Confounding. Confounding has traditionally been defined as bias arising from the co-occurrence or mixing of effects of extraneous factors, referred to as confounders, with the main effects of interest. 71. 72. A more recent definition of confounding invokes the notion of counterfactual effects. 72. According to this view, when one observes an outcome of interest, say y equals 1 as opposed to y equals 0, in a given population A which is entirely exposed, i.e. exposure x equals 1 for every unit of the population, the risk of this event will be Ra1. The counterfactual or unobserved risk Ra0 corresponds to the risk which would have been observed if these same individuals had been unexposed, i.e. x equals 0 for every unit of the population. The true effect of exposure therefore is Ra1 minus Ra0 if one is interested in risk differences, or Ra1, Ra0 if one is interested in relative risk. Since the counterfactual risk Ra0 is unobservable, we approximate it using a second population B and we actually measure the following relations: Ra1 minus Rb0 or Ra1, Rb0. In this situation, confounding occurs when Ra0 does not equal Rb0. 72. NB. Example assumes binary outcome and exposure variables. Some epidemiologists prefer to think of confounding separately from common categorizations of bias since, unlike selection and information bias, confounding stems from real causal effects. 69. Medicine portal. Few universities have offered epidemiology as a course of study at the undergraduate level. An undergraduate program exists at Johns Hopkins University in which students who major in public health can take graduate-level courses, including epidemiology, during their senior year at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. 73. In addition to its master's and doctoral degrees in epidemiology, the University of Michigan School of Public Health has offered undergraduate degree programs since 2017 that include coursework in epidemiology. 74. 75. Although epidemiologic research is conducted by individuals from diverse disciplines, variable levels of training in epidemiologic methods are provided during pharmacy, medical, veterinary, social work, podiatry, nursing, physical therapy, and clinical psychology doctoral programs in addition to the formal training masters and doctoral students in public health fields receive. As public health practitioners, epidemiologists work in a number of different settings. Some epidemiologists work in the field, i.e., in the community, commonly in a public health service, and are often at the forefront of investigating and combating disease outbreaks. Others work for nonprofit organizations, universities, hospitals, or larger government entities, e.g., state and local health departments in the United States, ministries of health, Doctors Without Borders, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, the Health Protection Agency, the World Health Organization, WHO, or the Public Health Agency of Canada. Epidemiologists can also work in for-profit organizations, e.g., pharmaceutical and medical device companies, in groups such as market research or clinical development. COVID-19. An April 2020 University of Southern California article noted that the coronavirus epidemic thrust epidemiology, the study of the incidence, distribution and control of disease in a population, to the forefront of scientific disciplines across the globe and even made temporary celebrities out of some of its practitioners. 76. Age adjustment, technique used to compare populations with different age profiles. Carfilli Heart Disease Study, Medical Research Project. Zoonosis. A zoonosis zoonos 1 plural. Zoonosis or zoonotic disease is an infectious disease of humans caused by a pathogen, an infectious agent, such as a bacterium, virus, parasite, or prion that can jump from a non-human vertebrate to a human. When humans infect non-humans, it is called reverse zoonosis or anthroponosis. 2, 1, 3, 4. Major modern diseases such as Ebola and Salmonellosis are zoonoses. HIV was a zoonotic disease transmitted to humans in the early part of the 20th century, though it has now evolved into a separate human-only disease. 5, 6, 7. Human infection with animal influenza viruses is rare, as they do not transmit easily to or among humans. 8. However, avian and swine influenza viruses in particular possess high zoonotic potential. 9. And these occasionally recombine with human strains of the flu and can cause pandemics such as the 2009 swine flu. 10. Zoonoses can be caused by a range of disease pathogens such as emergent viruses, bacteria, fungi and parasites. Of 1,415 pathogens known to infect humans, 61% were zoonotic. 10. Zoonoses can be caused by a range of disease pathogens such as emergent viruses, bacteria, fungi and parasites. Of 1,415 pathogens known to infect humans, 61% were zoonotic. 11. Most human diseases originated in non-humans, however, only diseases that routinely involve non-human to human transmission, such as rabies, are considered direct zoonoses. 10. Zoonoses can be caused by a range of disease pathogens such as emergent viruses, bacteria, fungi and parasites. Of 1,415 pathogens known to infect humans, 61% were zoonotic. 11. Most human diseases originated in non-humans, however, only diseases that routinely involve non-human to human transmission, such as rabies, are considered direct zoonoses. 12. Zoonoses have different modes of transmission. In direct zoonosis, the disease is directly transmitted from non-humans to humans through media such as air, influenza, or bites and saliva, rabies. 13. In contrast, transmission can also occur via an intermediate species, referred to as a vector, which carry the disease pathogen without getting sick. The term is from ancient Greek, zoe and zoon, animal, and nosos, sickness. Host genetics plays an important role in determining which non-human viruses will be able to make copies of themselves in the human body. Dangerous non-human viruses are those that require few mutations to begin replicating themselves in human cells. These viruses are dangerous since the required combinations of mutations might randomly arise in the natural reservoir. 14. Causes. The emergence of zoonotic diseases originated with the domestication of animals. 15. Zoonotic transmission can occur in any context in which there is contact with or consumption of animals, animal products, or animal derivatives. This can occur in a companionistic pets, economic farming, trade, butchering, etc., predatory hunting, butchering, or consuming wild game or research context. Recently, there has been a rise in frequency of appearance of new zoonotic diseases. Approximately 1.67 million undescribed viruses are thought to exist in mammals and birds, up to half of which are estimated to have the potential to spill over into humans, says a study 16 led by researchers at the University of California, Davis. According to a report from the United Nations Environment Programme and International Livestock Research Institute, a large part of the causes are environmental, like climate change, unsustainable agriculture, exploitation of wildlife, and land use change. Others are linked to changes in human society such as an increase in mobility. The organizations propose a set of measures to stop the rise. 17, 18. Contamination of food or water supply. Foodborne zoonotic diseases are caused by a variety of pathogens that can affect both humans and animals. The most significant zoonotic pathogens causing foodborne diseases are bacterial pathogens. Escherichia coli O157, H7, Campylobacter, Calicivirity, and Salmonella. 19, 20, 21. Viral pathogens. Hepatitis E. Hepatitis E virus, HEV, is primarily transmitted through pork products, especially in developing countries with limited sanitation. The infection can lead to acute liver disease and is particularly dangerous for pregnant women. 22. Norovirus. Often found in contaminated shellfish and fresh produce, norovirus is a leading cause of foodborne illness globally. It spreads easily and causes symptoms like vomiting, diarrhea, and stomach pain. 23. Parasitic pathogens. Toxoplasma gondii. This parasite is commonly found in undercooked meat, especially pork and lamb, and can cause toxoplasmosis. While typically mild, toxoplasmosis can be severe in immunocompromised individuals and pregnant women, potentially leading to complications. 24. Trichinella spp. Is transmitted through undercooked pork and wild game, causing trichinellosis. Symptoms range from mild gastrointestinal distress to severe muscle pain and, in rare cases, can be fatal. 25. Farming, ranching and animal husbandry. Contact with farm animals can lead to disease in farmers or others that come into contact with infected farm animals. Glanders primarily affects those who work closely with horses and donkeys. Close contact with cattle can lead to cutaneous anthrax infection, whereas inhalation anthrax infection is more common for workers in slaughterhouses, tanneries, and wool mills. 26. Close contact with sheep who have recently given birth can lead to infection with the bacterium Chlamydia psittaci, causing chlamydiosis and enzootic abortion in pregnant women, as well as increase the risk of Q fever, toxoplasmosis, and listeriosis in the pregnant or otherwise immunocompromised. Echinococcosis is caused by a tapeworm, which can spread from infected sheep by food or water contaminated by feces or wool. Avian influenza is common in chickens, and, while it is rare in humans, the main public health worry is that a strain of avian influenza will recombine with a human influenza virus and cause a pandemic like the 1918 Spanish flu. In 2017, free-range chickens in the UK were temporarily ordered to remain inside due to the threat of avian influenza. 27. Cattle are an important reservoir of cryptosporidiosis. 28. Which mainly affects the immunocompromised. Reports have shown mink can also become infected. 29. In Western countries, hepatitis E burden is largely dependent on exposure to animal products, and pork is a significant source of infection, in this respect. 22. Similarly, the human coronavirus OC43, the main cause of the common cold, can use the pig as a zoonotic reservoir. 30. Constantly reinfecting the human population. Veterinarians are exposed to unique occupational hazards when it comes to zoonotic disease. In the U.S., studies have highlighted an increased risk of injuries and lack of veterinary awareness of these hazards. Research has proved the importance for continued clinical veterinarian education on occupational risks associated with musculoskeletal injuries, animal bites, needle sticks, and cuts. 31. A July 2020 report by the United Nations Environment Programme stated that the increase in zoonotic pandemics is directly attributable to anthropogenic destruction of nature and the increased global demand for meat, and that the industrial farming of pigs and chickens in particular will be a primary risk factor for the spillover of zoonotic diseases in the future. 32. Habitat loss of viral reservoir species has been identified as a significant source in at least one spillover event. 33. Wildlife trade or animal attacks. The wildlife trade may increase spillover risk because it directly increases the number of interactions across animal species, sometimes in small spaces. 34. The origin of the COVID-19 pandemic, 35-36, is traced to the wet markets in China. 37, 38, 39, 40. Zoonotic disease emergence is demonstrably linked to the consumption of wildlife meat, exacerbated by human encroachment into natural habitats and amplified by the unsanitary conditions of wildlife markets. 41. These markets, where diverse species converge, facilitate the mixing and transmission of pathogens, including those responsible for outbreaks of HIV-1, 42. Ebola, 43, and Mpox, 44, and potentially even the COVID-19 pandemic. 45. Notably, small mammals often harbor a vast array of zoonotic bacteria and viruses. 46. Yet endemic bacterial transmission among wildlife remains largely unexplored. Therefore, accurately determining the pathogenic landscape of traded wildlife is crucial for guiding effective measures to combat zoonotic diseases and documenting the societal and environmental costs associated with this practice. Rabies insect vectors. African sleeping sickness. Dirophilariasis. Eastern equine encephalitis. Japanese encephalitis. St. Louis encephalitis. Scrub typhus. Tularemia. Venezuelan equine encephalitis. West Nile fever. Western equine encephalitis. Zika fever. Pets. Pets can transmit a number of diseases. Dogs and cats are routinely vaccinated against rabies. Pets can also transmit ringworm and giardia, which are endemic in both animal and human populations. Toxoplasmosis is a common infection of cats. In humans it is a mild disease, although it can be dangerous to pregnant women. 47. Dirophilariasis is caused by Dirofilaria amidis through mosquitoes infected by mammals like dogs and cats. Cat scratch disease is caused by Bartonella henselae and Bartonella quintana, which are transmitted by fleas that are endemic to cats. Toxocariasis is the infection of humans by any of species of roundworm, including species specific to dogs Toxocara canis or cats Toxocara cati. Cryptosporidiosis can be spread to humans from pet lizards, such as the leopard gecko. Encephalidozoon cuniculi is a microsporidile parasite carried by many mammals, including rabbits, and is an important opportunistic pathogen in people immunocompromised by HIV, AIDS, organ transplantation, or CD4+ T lymphocyte deficiency. 48. Pets may also serve as a reservoir of viral disease and contribute to the chronic presence of certain viral diseases in the human population. For instance, approximately 20% of domestic dogs, cats, and horses carry anti-hepatitis E virus antibodies, and thus these animals probably contribute to human hepatitis E burden as well. 49. For non-vulnerable populations, e.g., people who are not immunocompromised, the associated disease burden is, however, small. 50. Furthermore, the trade of non-domestic animals such as wild animals as pets can also increase the risk of zoonosis. Spread. 51. 52. Exhibition. Outbreaks of zoonoses have been traced to human interaction with, and exposure to, other animals at fairs, live animal markets, 53 petting zoos, and other settings. In 2005, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention (CDC) issued an updated list of recommendations for preventing zoonosis transmission in public settings. 54. The recommendations, developed in conjunction with the National Association of State Public Health Veterinarians, 55 include educational responsibilities of venue operators, limiting public animal contact, and animal care and management. Hunting and bushmeat. Hunting involves humans tracking, chasing, and capturing wild animals, primarily for food or materials like fur. However, other reasons like pest control or managing wildlife populations can also exist. Transmission of zoonotic diseases, those leaping from animals to humans, can occur through various routes: direct physical contact, airborne droplets or particles, bites or vector transport by insects, oral ingestion, or even contact with contaminated environments. 56. Wildlife activities like hunting and trade bring humans closer to dangerous zoonotic pathogens, threatening global health. 57. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention (CDC), hunting and consuming wild animal meat, bushmeat, in regions like Africa can expose people to infectious diseases due to the types of animals involved, like bats and primates. Unfortunately, common preservation methods like smoking or drying aren't enough to eliminate these risks. 58. Although bushmeat provides protein and income for many, the practice is intricately linked to numerous emerging infectious diseases like Ebola, HIV, and SARS, raising critical public health concerns. 57. A review published in 2022 found evidence that zoonotic spillover linked to wild meat consumption has been reported across all continents. 59. Deforestation, biodiversity loss and environmental degradation. Kate Jones, Chair of Ecology and Biodiversity at University College London, says zoonotic diseases are increasingly linked to environmental change and human behavior. The disruption of pristine forests driven by logging, mining, road building through remote places, rapid urbanization, and population growth is bringing people into closer contact with animal species they may never have been near before. The resulting transmission of disease from wildlife to humans, she says, is now a hidden cost of human economic development. 60. In a guest article, published by IPBES, President of the EcoHealth Alliance and zoologist Peter Daszak, along with 3 co-chairs of the 2019 Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, Joseph Settle, Sandra Diaz, and Eduardo Brandizio, wrote that rampant deforestation, uncontrolled expansion of agriculture, intensive farming, mining and infrastructure development, as well as the exploitation of wild species have created a perfect storm for the spillover of diseases from wildlife to people. 61. Joshua Moon, Claire Wenham, and Sophie Harmon said that there is evidence that decreased biodiversity has an effect on the diversity of hosts and frequency of human-animal interactions with potential for pathogenic spillover. 62. An April 2020 study, published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society's Part B journal, found that increased virus spillover events from animals to humans can be linked to biodiversity loss and environmental degradation. As humans further encroach on wildlands to engage in agriculture, hunting, and resource extraction, they become exposed to pathogens which normally would remain in these areas. Such spillover events have been tripling every decade since 1980. 63. An August 2020 study, published in Nature, concludes that the anthropogenic destruction of ecosystems for the purpose of expanding agriculture and human settlements reduces biodiversity and allows for smaller animals such as bats and rats, which are more adaptable to human pressures and also carry the most zoonotic diseases, to proliferate. This in turn can result in more pandemics. 64. In October 2020, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services published its report on the era of pandemics, by 22 experts in a variety of fields, and concluded that anthropogenic destruction of biodiversity is paving the way to the pandemic era and could result in as many as 850,000 viruses being transmitted from animals, in particular birds and mammals, to humans. The increased pressure on ecosystems is being driven by the exponential rise in consumption and trade of commodities such as meat, palm oil, and metals, largely facilitated by developed nations, and by a growing human population. According to Peter Daszak, the chair of the group who produced the report, there is no great mystery about the cause of the COVID-19 pandemic, or of any modern pandemic. The same human activities that drive climate change and biodiversity loss also drive pandemic risk through their impacts on our environment. 65, 66, 67. Climate change. According to a report from the United Nations Environment Programme and International Livestock Research Institute, entitled, Preventing the Next Pandemic, Zoonotic Diseases and How to Break the Chain of Transmission, climate change is one of the 7 human-related causes of the increase in the number of zoonotic diseases. 1718. The University of Sydney issued a study, in March 2021, that examines factors increasing the likelihood of epidemics and pandemics like the COVID-19 pandemic. The researchers found that pressure on ecosystems, climate change and economic development are key factors in doing so. More zoonotic diseases were found in high-income countries. 68. A 2022 study dedicated to the link between climate change and zoonosis found a strong link between climate change and the epidemic emergence in the last 15 years, as it caused a massive migration of species to new areas, and consequently contact between species which do not normally come in contact with one another. Even in a scenario with weak climatic changes, there will be 15,000 spillover of viruses to new hosts in the next decades. The areas with the most possibilities for spillover are the mountainous tropical regions of Africa and Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is especially vulnerable as it has a large number of bat species that generally do not mix, but could easily if climate change forced them to begin migrating. 69. A 2021 study found possible links between climate change and transmission of COVID-19 through bats. The authors suggest that climate-driven changes in the distribution and robustness of bat species harboring coronaviruses may have occurred in Eastern Asian hotspots, southern China, Myanmar, and Laos, constituting a driver behind the evolution and spread of the virus. 70-71. Secondary transmission. Zoonotic diseases contribute significantly to the burdened public health system as vulnerable groups such as the elderly, children, childbearing women and immune-compromised individuals are at risk. According to the World Health Organization (WHO), any disease or infection that is primarily, naturally, transmissible from vertebrate animals to humans or from humans to animals is classified as a zoonosis. 72. Factors such as climate change, urbanization, animal migration and trade, travel and tourism, vector biology, anthropogenic factors, and natural factors have greatly influenced the emergence, re-emergence, distribution, and patterns of zoonoses. 72. Zoonotic diseases generally refer to diseases of animal origin in which direct or vector-mediated animal-to-human transmission is the usual source of human infection. Animal populations are the principal reservoir of the pathogen and horizontal infection in humans is rare. A few examples in this category include lyssavirus infections, Lyme borreliosis, plague, tularemia, leptospirosis, ehrlichiosis, Nipah virus, West Nile virus WNV, and hantavirus infections. 73. Secondary transmission encompasses a category of diseases of animal origin in which the actual transmission to humans is a rare event but, once it has occurred, human-to-human transmission maintains the infection cycle for some period of time. Some examples include human immunodeficiency virus (HIV), acquired immune deficiency syndrome (AIDS), certain influenza strains, Ebola virus and severe acute respiratory syndrome (SARS). 73. One example is Ebola, which is spread by direct transmission to humans from handling bushmeat, wild animals hunted for food, and contact with infected bats or close contact with infected animals, including chimpanzees, fruit bats, and forest antelope. Secondary transmission also occurs from human to human by direct contact with blood, bodily fluids, or skin of patients with or who died of Ebola virus disease. 74. Some examples of pathogens with this pattern of secondary transmission are human immunodeficiency virus, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, influenza A, Ebola virus and severe acute respiratory syndrome. Recent infections of these emerging and re-emerging zoonotic infections have occurred as a result of many ecological and sociological changes globally. 73. History. During most of human prehistory, groups of hunter-gatherers were probably very small. Such groups probably made contact with other such bands only rarely. Such isolation would have caused epidemic diseases to be restricted to any given local population, because propagation and expansion of epidemics depend on frequent contact with other individuals who have not yet developed an adequate immune response. 75. To persist in such a population, a pathogen either had to be a chronic infection, staying present and potentially infectious in the infected host for long periods, or it had to have other additional species as reservoir where it can maintain itself until further susceptible hosts are contacted and infected. 76. 77. In fact, for many human diseases, the human is actually better viewed as an accidental or incidental victim and a dead-end host. Examples include rabies, anthrax, tularemia, and West Nile fever. Thus, much of human exposure to infectious disease has been zoonotic. 78. Possibilities for zoonotic disease transmissions. Many diseases, even epidemic ones, have zoonotic origin, and measles, smallpox, influenza, HIV, and diphtheria are particular examples. 79. 80. Various forms of the common cold and tuberculosis also are adaptations of strains originating in other species. Some experts have suggested that all human viral infections were originally zoonotic. 81. Zoonoses are of interest because they are often previously unrecognized diseases or have increased virulence in populations lacking immunity. The West Nile virus first appeared in the United States in 1999, in the New York City area. Bubonic plague is a zoonotic disease. 82. As are salmonellosis, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and Lyme disease. A major factor contributing to the appearance of new zoonotic pathogens in human populations is increased contact between humans and wildlife. 83. This can be caused either by encroachment of human activity into wilderness areas or by movement of wild animals into areas of human activity. An example of this is the outbreak of Nipah virus in peninsular Malaysia, in 1999, when intensive pig farming began within the habitat of infected fruit bats. 84. The unidentified infection of these pigs amplified the force of infection, transmitting the virus to farmers, and eventually causing 105 human deaths. 85. Similarly, in recent times avian influenza and West Nile virus have spilled over into human populations, probably due to interactions between the carrier host and domestic animals. Highly mobile animals, such as bats and birds, may present a greater risk of zoonotic transmission than other animals due to the ease with which they can move into areas of human habitation. Because they depend on the human host 86 for part of their life cycle, diseases such as African schistosomiasis, river blindness, and elephantiasis are not defined as zoonotic, even though they may depend on transmission by insects or other vectors. Use in vaccines. The first vaccine against smallpox by Edward Jenner in 1800 was by infection of a zoonotic bovine virus which caused a disease called cowpox. 87. Jenner had noticed that milkmaids were resistant to smallpox. Milkmaids contracted a milder version of the disease from infected cows that conferred cross-immunity to the human disease. Jenner abstracted an infectious preparation of cowpox and subsequently used it to inoculate persons against smallpox. As a result of vaccination, smallpox has been eradicated globally, and mass inoculation against this disease ceased in 1981. 88. There are a variety of vaccine types, including traditional inactivated pathogen vaccines, subunit vaccines, live attenuated vaccines. There are also new vaccine technologies such as viral vector vaccines and DNA, RNA vaccines, which include many of the COVID-19 vaccines. 89. Disease. 90. Pathogens, animals involved. Mode of transmission, emergence. African sleeping sickness. Trypanosoma. Brucei rhodesiense, range of wild animals and domestic livestock transmitted by the bite of the tsetse fly. Present in Africa for thousands of years. Major outbreak 1900-1920. Cases continue. Sub-Saharan Africa, 2020. Use 89th disease 90 pathogens animals involved. Mode of transmission emergence. African sleeping sickness. Trypanosoma. Brucei rhodesiense range of wild animals and domestic. Livestock transmitted by the bite of the tsetse fly. Present in Africa for thousands of years. Major outbreak 1900-1920. Cases continue. Sub-Saharan Africa, 2020. Angiostrongyliasis. Angiostrongylis cantonensis, Angiostrongylis costaricensis rats, cotton rats. Consuming raw or undercooked. Snails, slugs, other mollusks. Crustaceans, contaminated water, and unwashed. Vegetables. Contaminated with larvae. Anisakiasis anisakis. Whales, dolphins, seals, sea lions, other marine animals. Eating raw or undercooked fish and squid. Contaminated with eggs. Anthrax bacillus anthracis. Commonly, grazing. Herbivores such as cattle, sheep, goats, camels, horses, and pigs by ingestion. Inhalation or skin contact of spores. Babesiosis babesia spp. Mice, other animals. Tick bite. Baileys ascariasis. Bailoscecharis procyon. Raccoons. Ingestion of eggs in feces. Barma forest fever Barma forest virus. Kangaroos, wallabies, opossums mosquito bite. Avian influenza virus subtype H5N1. Wild birds. Domesticated close contact 2003 present avian influenza in Southeast Asia and Egypt. Lists of diseases. Birds such as chickens 91. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy prions cattle. Eating infected meat. Isolated similar cases reported in ancient history. In recent UK history probable start in the 1970s 92. Brucellosis brucella spp. Cattle, goats, pigs, sheep. Infected milk or meat. Historically widespread in Mediterranean region, identified early 20th century. Bubonic plague, pneumonic plague, septicemic plague, sylvatic plague Yersinia pestis. Rabbits, hares, rodents, ferrets, goats, sheep, camels. Flea bite. Epidemics like Black Death in Europe around 1347-53 during the late Middle Age, third plague pandemic in China Qing dynasty and India alone. Capillariasis capillaria spp. Rodents, birds, foxes. Eating raw or undercooked fish, ingesting embryonated eggs in fecal contaminated food, water, or soil. Cat scratch disease Bartonella henselae cats. Bites or scratches from infected cats Chagas disease Trypanosoma cruzi. Armadillos, Triatomine kissing bug contact of mucosaire. Wounds with feces of kissing bugs. Accidental ingestion of parasites in food contaminated by bugs or infected mammal excretae. Chlamydiosis enzootic abortion Chlamydophila abortus. Domestic livestock. Particularly sheep close contact with postpartum use suspected, COVID-19. Severe acute respiratory syndrome. Coronavirus 2 suspected, bats, felines, raccoon dogs, minks, white-tailed deer, 93. Respiratory transmission 2019 present COVID-19 pandemic, ongoing pandemic Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. PRPVCJD cattle. Eating meat from animals with bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE. 1996-2001, United Kingdom. Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever orthonarovirus cattle, goats, sheep, birds, multimammat rats, hares. Tick bite, contact with bodily fluids. Cryptococcus. Cryptococcus neoformans commonly, birds like pigeons. Inhaling fungi. Cryptosporidiosis. Cryptosporidium spp. Cattle, dogs, cats, mice, pigs. Horses, deer, sheep, goats, rabbits, leopard geckos, birds ingesting cysts from water. Contaminated with feces. Cysticercosis and teniasis. Taenia solium, Taenia asiatica, Taenia saginata commonly, pigs and cattle. Consuming water, soil or food. Contaminated with the tapeworm eggs, cysticercosis, or raw. Undercooked pork contaminated with the cysticerce. Teniasis. Dirophilariasis Dirofilaria spp. Dogs, wolves, coyotes, foxes, jackals, cats, monkeys. Raccoons, bears, muskrats, rabbits, leopards, seals, sea lions. Beavers, ferrets, reptiles. Mosquito bite. Eastern equine encephalitis. Venezuelan equine encephalitis, Western equine encephalitis Eastern equine encephalitis virus, Venezuelan equine encephalitis virus, horses, donkeys, zebras, birds. Mosquito bite. Western equine encephalitis virus. Ebola virus disease, a hemorrhagic fever. Ebola virus SPP. Chimpanzees, gorillas. Orangutans, fruit bats, monkeys, shrews, forest antelope and porcupines through body fluids and organs. 2013-16, possible in Africa. Other hemorrhagic fevers: Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, dengue fever, Lassa fever, Marburg viral hemorrhagic fever, Rift Valley fever 94. Fairies, commonly viruses. Fairies. Sometimes unknown, commonly. Camels, rabbits, hares, hedgehogs, cattle, sheep. Goats, horses and swine. Infection usually occurs through direct contact with infected animals. 2019-20 dengue fever. Echinococcosis echinococcus SPP. Commonly, dogs, foxes, jackals, wolves, coyotes, sheep, pigs, rodents. Ingestion of infective eggs from contaminated food or water with feces of an infected definitive host. Fasciolosis. Fasciola hepatica, Fasciola gigantica. Sheep, cattle, buffaloes. Ingesting contaminated plants. Fasciolopsiasis busky pigs. Eating raw vegetables such as water spinach. Foodborne illnesses, commonly diarrheal diseases. Campylobacter SPP, Escherichia coli, Salmonella SPP, Listeria SPP, Shigella SPP, and Trichinella SPP. Animals. Domesticated for food production: cattle, poultry, raw or undercooked food made from animals and unwashed. Vegetables. Contaminated with feces. Giardiasis, Giardia lamblia. Beavers, other rodents. Raccoons, deer, cattle, goats. Sheep, dogs, cats ingesting spores and cysts in food and water. Contaminated with feces. Glanders, Burkholderia male, horses, donkeys. Direct contact. Gnathostomiasis, Gnathostoma SPP. Dogs, minks. Opossums, cats, lions, tigers. Leopards. Raccoons, poultry, other birds, frogs, raw or undercooked fish or meat. Hantavirus SPP. Deer, mice, cotton rats and other rodents. Exposure to feces, urine, saliva or bodily fluids. Henopavirus SPP. Horses, bats. Exposure to feces, urine, saliva or contact with sick horses. Hepatitis E virus. Domestic and wild animals, contaminated food or water. Histoplasmosis. Histoplasma capsulatum, birds, bats. Inhaling fungi in guano. HIV. SIV simian. Immunodeficiency virus. Non-human primates blood. Immunodeficiency resembling human AIDS was reported in captive monkeys in the United States beginning in 1983. 95, 96, 97, SIV was isolated in 1985 from some of these animals, captive rhesus macaques who had simian AIDS, SIDS. 96. The discovery of SIV was made shortly after HIV-1 had been isolated as a cause of AIDS and led to the discovery of HIV-2 strains in West Africa. HIV-2 was more similar to the think-known SIV strains than to HIV-1, suggesting for the first time the simian origin of HIV. Further studies indicated that HIV-2 is derived from the SIV-SMM strain found in City-Mangabeys, whereas HIV-1, the predominant virus found in humans, is derived from SIV strains infecting chimpanzees, SIV-CPZ, Japanese encephalitis Japanese. Encephalitis virus, pigs, water birds, mosquito bite. Chiasinure forest disease. Chiasinure forest disease virus, rodents, shrews, bats, monkeys, tick bite. Lacrosse encephalitis, lacrosse virus. Chipmunks, tree squirrels. Mosquito bite. Leishmaniasis, Leishmania SPP. Dogs, rodents, other animals. 98, 99. Sandfly bite 2004, Afghanistan. Leprosy. Mycobacterium leprae. Mycobacterium lepromatosis, armadillos. Monkeys, rabbits. Mice. 100. Direct contact, including meat consumption. However, scientists believe most infections are spread human to human. 100, 101. Leptospirosis. Leptospira interrogans, rats, mice, pigs, horses, goats, sheep, cattle, buffaloes. Opossums, raccoons, mongooses, foxes, dogs. Direct or indirect contact with urine of infected animals. 16-16-20 New England infection, present day in the United States. Lassa fever virus, rodents. Exposure to rodents. Lyme disease, Borrelia burgdorferi. Deer, wolves, dogs, birds. Rodents, rabbits, hares, reptiles. Tick bite. Lymphocytic. Choriomeningitis lymphocytic. Choriomeningitis virus. Rodents. Exposure to urine, feces, or saliva. Melioidosis. Burkholderia pseudomale, various animals. Direct contact with contaminated soil and surface water. Microsporidiosis. Encephalidozune cuniculi. Rabbits, dogs, mice, and other mammals. Ingestion of spores. Middle East. Respiratory syndrome, MERS, coronavirus, bats, camels. Close contact 2012 present, Saudi Arabia. Mpox, monkeypox virus, rodents, primates.